Hi there. Welcome to Barrier 101. Today we'll be covering almost everything you need to know about MUN. This will take around half an hour to 40 minutes. Could be more, could be less. Depends on how fast I go. Right, I'd like to apologize if my voice sounds a bit raspy or irritated. I am irritated. BPM 2.5 is crazy today. Alright, and I'm also filming this at like 5 a.m. So apologies for that as well. Let's get started, shall we? Alright, MUN 101 Masterclass. So first of all, we'd like to extend our gratitude for the Concordian MUN Club for allowing our department to adapt the slides from CIS MUN 1. These slides are quite old. They're around 3 to 4 years old, so if there are any different things that have changed in the community, I will let you know. So the first question, of course, we ask is, what is Model United Nations exactly? People think it's debating, people think it's delegates trying to maneuver around each other and get what they want. Well, I'd say it's both things. It's not entirely debate, it's not entirely actual politics. It is where students emulate the actual workings of the United Nations, right? So what you're trying to do is copying what the UN should be, not what it is, but what it should be. Idealistically, what was the UN designed to do? The UN was designed to have world peace, to solve problems, and to pass resolutions to improve the living standards of every single human being, right? So we have to look at everything that we debate about in MUN through that framework. Even though you are the United Nations or North Korea and you have malicious intent in some topic, you should try your best to look at everything through a holistic, relatively holistic lens, right? So I'm just gonna read this out here. Model UN is a simulation of the United Nations where students represent delegates of countries in the UN to debate important world issues like gender equality, climate change, and global health. Okay. And here are also some basics. Each delegate will be assigned a country in a committee. Each committee will have 1 or 2 topics. It's normally 1 topic if it's a 1-day conference. It's 2 if it's a 2-day conference. And basically these delegates debate and then work together to write resolutions, which are basically like written solutions to the topic constructed from the perspective and policies of their assigned country, right? So in MUN, your personal opinions do not matter. It's more about the opinions and stances of your own country that you were assigned. Then how do you implement that? How do you argue that stance, even though you might not even believe it? So that's the hard part about MUN, being able to basically transcend your own beliefs, block them out or ignore them, and then basically embody a whole other country, embody a whole different personality or political beliefs, right? Which is what some people can find hard about MUN, but I'm here to help you break it down. So after these resolutions are completed, delegates will debate and then vote on these resolutions, and I'll go into further analysis on what this means and whether or not it passes or it may not pass, right? So in a typical committee, which is basically like a group of delegates who operate under a UN organ or a specific theme, they're run by a chair, right? So lately I've been chairing a lot. By the end of the year, I will have attended my 21st conference, so you can be sure that I am indeed qualified to, give this, I don't know what this is called, session. I'm the only one recommended because we're probably the only people who are doing this kind of education on MUN, so that's good. If you want us to do anything else, please let us know, alright? So there's 4 main things you do in a committee. First of all, you open. So at the beginning of the committee, chairs will check attendance via a roll call. So it's probably in alphabetical order, and then delegates will come out to provide their opening speeches. We'll go into all of this in a very detailed way. There's also discussion, right? So the floor is open to delegates who are then free to discuss the proposed topic during a moderated caucus. Resolution writing, which is when you go into an unmoderated caucus and delegates will write their own resolution alongside other delegates who share the same or similar beliefs in the committee. And lastly, you vote. So once the debate and discussion is over, delegates will vote on whether or not the resolution is discussed will pass or not pass. What I encourage for new delegates is to not care that much on whether or not your resolution passes, right? It doesn't actually matter because chairs do not evaluate your performance on whether or not your resolution is voted in or not. It's evaluated with your effort. So if you put your effort into debating, into writing, into leading your block, for example, you will have a far higher chance at winning an award than just lobbying or convincing other people to only convincing them to vote on it, right? If you convince them, good to go. But you should have a well-rounded selection of skills that you choose to portray to us chairs. All right. So first thing is roll call. So in roll call, the chair will call on delegates one by alphabetical order, like I said before, by their country name. Delegates can respond in two different ways. First of all, present and voting, right? So there is a difference here. Delegates can abstain in later substantive votes if they say they're present, and they can't abstain if they say present and voting. Now, you might ask me, why would you ever choose present and voting? Actually, most delegates choose present and voting because roll call isn't just about taking attendance, it's also showing the other delegates what you truly believe in. So if your country has a very strong stance on this topic, then you might be more inclined to go present in voting to show that you are committed to do something, right? That you are able to vote on every single thing that comes. Some delegates might choose present because their country or their style is more neutral, right? There's nothing wrong with that, but I would definitely encourage present in voting to maximize your ability to engage in the conference, okay? Okay, opening speeches. So right after we have the roll call, we go into opening speeches. So what is it actually? But first of all, let's establish the language used in MUN, which is a bit complex, a bit harder for people to understand when they are new to MUN. So personal pronouns are absolutely not allowed when giving speeches or points, right? So I, you, we, they. You cannot use these words or you will be penalized if the chair is a relatively strict chair. You always address people, including yourself, as the delegate of country, or you address groups as the delegates of country, or you may just call them the country. Up to you, honestly. Just have a bit of diversity when you mention a lot of people at the same time, right? So here's some examples. I'm honored to attend this conference today is absolutely not allowed. The delegate of Russia is honored to attend this conference today is allowed. He is absent today and they want to amend the resolution. You cannot do that. You need to either list them out individually, like the delegates of Russia, Germany, and Libya, or say the bloc or the opposing bloc, or the delegate of Germany is absent today. As you can see, we are very selective on how we use language in MUN, but of course, you will learn as you do more MUNs either way. So, an opening speech is basically a delegate's required speech to propose their stance, or just let you know what they believe in properly in the conference, right? So they have 1 minute to come up and provide their speech. There's no POIs afterwards. So they're also called to speak in alphabetical order, right? So let's take a look at a speech outline for a second here. So this is quite a formal outline. I would say you don't need exactly this template. You can take a screenshot if you want, but you can also write on a normal Google Doc without this much format, because you ultimately know what the information is, right? So the conference, country, committee, topics, then you don't really need that. What you really need is down here, right? So I'm just gonna show you this and I'm gonna break it down. So first of all, we have honorable chairs, esteemed and fellow delegates. You absolutely need this. This is basically a part of the MUN etiquette, the tradition that we have. You always address people like this when you come up to speak, especially in the opening speech, right? So we also have the delegate is more than honored to attend this conference and meeting today. You don't exactly need this. However, it is good because it shows your appreciation for the chairs, might get you that extra point, you know? And we also have, in regards to the topic / issue / the question of blah, 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 blah. This format here is for a 2-day conference. So sometimes in a 2-day conference, you might only come up to speak in an opening speech once at the start of the conference, or you might come up to speak 2 different opening speeches on each day. It doesn't really matter, right? But you only really need one of these on the topic of paragraphs if you're only doing one topic. And then you provide your stance a bit more, and I'll go into how you can do this and how you can research to write the opening speeches later on, like probably in half an hour, right? And at the end, you say, all in all, blah, 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 is grateful for having a chance to contribute to the decisions of the blah, blah, blah committee. And then you say, the delegate now yields the floor back to the chair. This is absolutely crucial. You must say this. Why? Because in MUN, the floor represents your right to speak. So if you do not yield the floor back to the chair, they will get angry, or they will ask you, delegate, do you wish to yield the floor to another delegate or to the chair? When you do an opening speech, you must always yield the floor back to the chair. It's tradition. Just don't try other things. So let's take a look at topics here, right? I'll show you an opening speech, but I'll say what the topic is on up for this opening speech first. So we have the question of implementing cybersecurity, quite broad, quite a weird motion, but we'll go with it. And the question of foreign military interventions in internal conflicts. Okay. So as you can see, we have this in a 2-day all-in-one-go format. So I'm going to read this out, okay? Honorable chairs and esteemed delegates, the delegate of Russia is honored to attend this conference today. Fellow delegates, in this digital age we live in, it is important for us, the UN, to implement stricter cybersecurity measures across all member states. Russia, as well as fellow delegates, could agree that public order and national security take precedent. Internet usage should be held to these ideas as well. This is why Russia is in favor for countries to exert fair governmental control on their population's use of the internet. To address the topic of foreign interventions in internal conflicts, recent actions like Russia brokering a ceasefire between Turks and Kurds has called the need for clearer, firmer, and newer regulations pertaining to the pretenses of intervention upon others' internal conflicts. Otherwise, this delegate hopes for a fruitful debate and now yields the floor back to the chair. I'm just going to let you seep that in for a moment. Also because I need water. Okay. I have some critiques about this opening speech, of course. The materials we provide will not be all perfect. We will critique it along the way in this session. This is quite a broad opening speech, right? Maybe because they are trying to knock out 2 motions with one opening speech, but still, they should have a bit more detail into it. Maybe we could provide a... Alright, we're back. So, I'm going to critique this opening speech, mainly because it lacks a lot of development. Even though opening speeches aren't exactly for arguing a specific stance, you should still have some kind of context or world building into it so that other countries in the chair can understand that you have a firm understanding of the topic, right? So, let's see here, okay? Fellow delegates, in this digital age we live in, it is important for us, the UN, to implement stricter cybersecurity measures across all member states. So that is a thesis statement. That's absolutely fine. Russia, as fellow delegates, could agree that public order and national security take precedent. I would actually encourage whoever wrote this to add a bit more. What exactly is public order and national security? Is it fighting against terrorist groups? Is it making sure that we don't have a lot of crime rates? What is going on here? If the chair doesn't know, then everyone else does not know, right? If they are a new delegate, they're going to be like, hold up. What even is public order? You know, if you're a more experienced delegate, you might be able to deduce it, but still, we shouldn't leave anything up to the thought of other delegates when you're doing an opening speech. Opening speeches are short, yes, but you need to be able to convey very powerful, very strong stances in the opening speech to make sure that everyone can start firing notes at you and start networking and start making blocks to write resolutions right away. Here is another opening speech. This is by Albania in the advisory panel on the EU. There are 3 topics. That is a very crazy list of topics, very hard list of topics. But as you can see, we are kind of breaking this down a bit with the color coding. So the bright blue that's highlighted here is basically the going into the speech and going out of the speech. It's just very traditional stuff. Albania is in red, and pink is basically commentary, and black is also commentary, right? there are basically filler words in the light blue area in regards to the topic on the migrant crisis, blah, 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 blah. And then we have the green area, which is basically the substantive part, right? Albania feels sympathetic towards migrant refugees. However, the delegation of Albania believes that security control must be enforced in the nation in order to limit the flow of migrants into the country. Or, Albania is currently a potential candidate, however, is not admitted due to the EU's decision to not expand within the next 5 years. Despite this, however, Albania remains a close and strong ally of the US in countries part of the EU. So this is quite a better opening speech by a lot than this one from STAMUN, right? So this one from BKKMUN would be the one I would use as an example of an opening speech. I'm not going to go into this one, but you can take a look here. This is in the dissect committee, and we'll go into what committees there are, and it's all right. Okay, now we're going to go into committee procedures. So what exactly is going on in MUN? Like, what rules do we have? What basic things do you need to know? What's the flow of each committee so that you can be able to basically schedule, if you're a chair, or kind of understand the flow so that you're able to plan your, I don't know, expansion of power, I guess. But there are a few caucuses, yeah, funny word, I know. But there are a few caucuses in MUN that you can motion for. So the standard caucus, the most common caucus, is a moderated caucus. Basically, it's a structured debate where each delegate can speak for 60 to 90 seconds with an overall time of 10 to 20 minutes, right? The chair probably won't give you 30. It's a bit too much. And in a mod cauc, it's basically used to discuss a more specific part of the overall committee topic. So, I'll give you an example. Let's say the delegate of Afghanistan motions for a moderated caucus, 60 seconds speaking time per person for 10 minutes on the topic of disarmament within the Afghan civil war or something like that, right? Then delegates will vote on it, and if they don't like a part of it, then they say no. If they like a part of it, then they will say yes. I would encourage everyone to have to motion for at least one moderated caucus because it's an extremely reliable and effective way of conveying what you believe, of stimulating debate within the entire committee, right? So it allows you to ask POIs, it allows you to make speeches to show what you really believe while also allowing other countries to interact with your stances and while also allowing you to interact publicly. Chairs do not take note of whether or not you talk a lot when you send like paper slips to each other through the pages. What they do take note of is your speeches. What they do take note of is your leadership during unmod and all these things while you're debating the resolution. We also have consultation of a whole. This is a more flexible style of debating, right? So it's a semi-formal debate where delegates can speak for as long as they want. Not really. If you speak for like 2 minutes straight, the chair probably would say, okay, stop, delegate, you've spoken enough, yield to another delegate, right? But in this case, you don't have to yield back to the chair, you can yield to delegates right away. So it's a back and forth, you don't have to come up to the podium, you can just stay where you are. It's like a council meeting, exactly. And when you're called on, you can sit down depending on the ROP, or you can stand up and present your stance. I quite like it. It's a very productive way. It gets messages across way better than moderated caucuses. But of course, moderated caucuses have that kind of structure that you need to kind of allow the chairs to process everything. They might not process as much of the entire debate in consultations of a whole, and consultations of a whole are far more likely to create division. So creating division is good in some cases if you want to emphasize what your country believes in or what the other side is doing wrong. However, it depends a lot on the context of the actual committee, right? So I say be a bit careful when you're doing consultations of a whole. Right, yielding. Yielding is basically a power each delegate can have. Yielding the floor, like the floor I'm standing on, that's not actually the floor. The floor is basically the right to speak, the right to talk without being interrupted, right? So you can yield to 3 different things. You can yield to the chair, you can yield to another delegate, and you can yield to POIs. There is a difference here, right? So yielding to a chair means you want to move on to the next delegate within the list of speakers, and the chair will facilitate this. If you yield to another delegate, another delegate gets to speak in the time that you have left. Although in more modern conferences, you might yield directly to a delegate to come speak in a modern caucus or in a consultation of a whole. Although it's quite uncommon either way, so I wouldn't worry that much about yielding to another delegate, except if you're in consultation of a whole. Yielding to POIs. This doesn't really happen a lot anymore. What you do is you yield back to the chair. Then the chair will ask, is the delegate open to any POIs? Then the delegate will say yes, or any at all, or no if you're scared, right? And POIs are basically questions people ask you in the speeches. We'll go into this either in this part or later on. It's not that complicated, but there is a there is a certain way to maximize your ability to ask POIs. Alright, now we have the overall view of the committee, and this will take a bit of a time to explain, but I'm here for it, okay? So once you go into roll call and you have your opening speeches, you go into either three different things: Mod Caucus, GSL, or Unmod. Mod Caucus is what we talked about before. GSL is basically a Mod Caucus, but the queue to speak can always be added upon. So let's say there were 5 delegates who were scheduled to speak. You can motion to be added to the speakers list, or you can message the chair on whatever app you have assigned to the committee, or most notably like in note form, and they will add you to the GSL. And if the time stops, they either have to motion for a extension, or they just stop and don't have the delegates come up anymore when time runs out. And you have Unmod as well. Unmod is basically a free reign. You can talk in personal pronouns, no problem at all. You use it to negotiate deals, to talk with other groups, and to form blocks to write and draft resolutions, which is the next step. So after about an hour or an hour and a half of drafting resolutions through different sessions, you will go into debate. And then you'll go to voting, and then you'll go to repeating. But before that, in between voting, there's actually something called amendments, right? So amendments are basically changes you want to make to the resolution. You want to modify it, and there's different designations. I'll go into it later. And then the conference ends. All right, points. What are points in MUN exactly? So outside of a Mod Caucus, delegates are not allowed to talk unless formally recognized by the chair. So when recognized, the delegate must declare their point before speaking, right? So these are things outside a speech. So a point is basically a superpower or an ability you can use if you play video games, for example. That's a good comparison, right? So there are POIs and POCs. POIs and POCs are questions you can ask another delegate's in another delegate's speech, right? So this usually goes under the order of POC first, then POI. POCs are basically a points of clarification, a question asked to clarify details regarding a speech or something they talked about in their speech, and a POI, or point of information, is the most common point that you can use, right? So it's a question asked to attack or basically strengthen another delegate's points. I like how they word this in the slide here. It's not actually a question. Like, you don't want to know the answer, because you have Google, you have different things that you can use in MUN. You probably know the answer already, unless it's something about their motive or something you want them to explain, but that's in clarification. A point of information is actually seen more as a weapon you can use to either bolster your ally's point by, asking a pointed question, or destroying someone's argument by asking a really, really hard question they can't answer that makes them look stupid or looks incompetent, right? I wouldn't really encourage you to use very aggressive points of information, because, some chairs might not like it. I personally don't like it that much. I'm all for competitiveness, right? But if you attack someone's speech that much, you should just come up and have another speech for yourself, not ask a question. So there's also point of personal privilege. So if you need to pee or poop, you ask the chair, like, pee, made this delegate go, or just, if you're very brave, just come up and say, chair, point of personal privilege, may the delegate go to the toilet, and then you can be like, and they will probably be like, yes, of course, or no, if they're weird. So there are also points regarding the ROP. There's point of parliamentary inquiry, which is basically a question to the chairs regarding the ROP, or point of order, which is a point raised when a delegate believes that there has been a breach of the ROP either by the chairs, which is kind of rare, or by another delegate. But chairs have the final say regarding whether or not the point of order is valid, right? There's also point of grievance, which is a point raised when a delegate has been directly insulted. So let's say I say all the African nations stink. All the African nations will be like, oh, chair, please, point of grievance. And then if the chairs believe that the point of grievance is valid, then there's a reason for the delegate, there's a reason for the delegate to be mad or angry or insulted in some way. Then the delegate will have the right to make a right or reply speech in self-defense. You basically clap back. You defend your own reputation, or you might attack back. I don't know. I don't really do that much points of grievance, but it depends on if the other delegates are very, very aggressive, which is common in either beginner committees or committees where they have a lot of advanced people who can just do whatever they want. Right, motions. So motions are basically proposals, mini proposals you can vote on to do different things within the committee, right? So what are motions in MUN exactly? Motions are basically requests by delegates to the chair, right? Delegates motion for things they want to happen, like a mod caucus or consultation of a whole, and then you can add descriptions like 60 or 90 seconds speeches. Delegates also vote on the motion they want. So each motion needs to have at least half of the delegates in favor for it to pass. It can depend on the RRP whether or not it's a supermajority, which is around like 75%, or a simple majority, which is 51%. So motions are voted in order of the most destructive, which is like the longest motion, or the most like weird, or the motion that's going to take as much effort as possible, and then you go down to the least disruptive motion. So there are different motions that you use typically. There's four ones in debate, right? So there's motion to open debate, so made at the beginning of the first committee session. There's also motion to suspend debate, so stop. I don't know why no one uses this that much, but yeah. There's also motion to resume debate, so after each break has ended, they motion to resume debate back. We don't really use this as much in the modern circuit, but they used to do this a lot. We just kind of like chair's discretion, bang the gavel, then immediately just go to break. There's also a motion to close debate, so after you're all done with resolutions, you do that. We also don't do this that much anymore, but you might find this in foreign MUNs in Singapore or in Yale or in Harvard, where they still do a lot of these things. Motions for committee proceedings, right? So there are there's three simple motions you can do. Motion for a moderated caucus. Delegates must specify the total time of the moderated caucus, the individual speaking time, and the topic. Motion for a consultation of a whole, where delegates must specify the total time of the consultation, usually 10 to 20 minutes. And motion for an unmod caucus, where delegates must specify the total time of the unmoderated caucus, which is usually 10 to 30 minutes. However, in the modern circuit, we start to see the rise of unmod caucus that are like 40 to 1 hour and a half. If they want to finish their resolution in one go, that can probably work as well. But it's up to the chairs either way. By the way, up to the chairs in this case means chair's discretion. Chairs have absolute power. They can do whatever they want within the realm of possibility, right? So if chairs say chair's discretion, unmod for this amount of time, you must follow through with it. What they say is basically the rule in the committee. It is real. Whatever they say, whatever decisions they make, that has now become canon. That is official within the committee. Okay, so there are also motions for a resolution debate. For example, the motion to introduce a draft resolution, or motion to move to amendments, or a motion to move to a voting procedure, right? In all these motions, delegates have to specify which motions they are referring to, right? So if you want to debate resolution 1.1 first or 1.2 first, you have to tell the chair. There's also weird motions, like or what we call miscellaneous motions, like the motion for a moment of silence. Maybe someone actually died in the real world, or someone died fictionally, or the motion to play a national anthem. Chairs don't really allow this. They can see it as frivolous, but if it's an advanced committee where they know that most people know what they're doing, or time has already given them a lot of space to play with. Since they're done with a lot of wrestles, they might allow for miscellaneous motions, right? They're quite fun, but focus on the prize, right? Eyes on the prize. Now we are at resolution writing. So in resolutions, delegates will vote for a motion for an unmarked caucus where they are free to talk to other delegates and start writing their resolutions, which usually they break off into 2 or more teams, right? Resolutions must reflect the policies and perspectives of each main sponsor and co-sponsor countries when solving a given topic. So here's the structure of a resolution, right? So you have preambulatory clauses and then you have operative clauses. Preambulatory clauses are basically clauses that give background information or describe the committee topic. I'll show you later. And there's also operative clauses, where there are clauses that basically outline what the resolution will do in response to the committee topic. So every standard resolution has one main sponsor and 2 co-sponsors and then multiple signatories. However, in the modern MUN circuit, we now see that there's 2 main sponsors even for a one-day conference and multiple co-sponsors in the committee, and then signatories are actually people on the other block who want to see the resolution debated, right? So the main sponsor has the job to write the bulk of the resolution, give a forced speech, and answer all POIs and POCs. And they also have to come up to provide a main submitter speech, where basically what they do is they read out the main operative clauses, and then they have 4 minutes shared in total to talk about why they think people should vote for the resolution. And then co-sponsors can come up to provide for or against speeches depending on what they believe in, right? And then multiple signatories. If you are a signatory, you don't actually have to believe in the credibility of the resolution or if it's impactful, right? You just want to have it being, you just want it to be debated. So now we're at debating, which is the most fun part of MUN by far. Okay, so there are 2 types of speeches you can give when you're debating a resolution. There's a forced speech where main sponsors give 1 forced speech, like I talked about before, and forced speeches are also given by a couple of co-sponsors depending on what time is left. If there's a lot of time, you might have like 3 forced speeches, or if there's no time, you might have 1 or 2 forced speeches instead, right? So they act the same way as a moderated caucus when in terms of speaking in the caucus, right? So there's also against speeches. Against speeches basically are given to oppose a resolution or oppose a certain idea that the other bloc is trying to propose, and delegates who are against what is written in the resolution are highly encouraged to give an against speech. So they are in the same format as a for speech, but just the opposite way, believing the opposite thing, right? These have to basically persuade the committee to vote against or abstain against the resolution. So it's a bit more aggressive, a bit more jarring, it takes a lot more courage to have an against speech rather than a for speech. So the default speech structure of for and against speeches is basically ACSC. Remember that, ACSC. Address the topic. What do you want to talk about? C, context. What is the context of this? What world are we living in? What is the topic exactly? S, specific clauses. Use this as evidence either to support the resolution or to go against the resolution. Remember, you're not attacking other people. You are attacking other people's resolutions. And lastly, conclusion. What do you want the people to get out of this? So now we have an example of a for speech. This is by Germany, I think. So, honorable chairs and esteemed delegates, the world is on a brink of destruction. With 2 minutes to midnight on the doomsday clock, nuclear weapons have existed since the 1940s, and its proliferation has always been hotly debated for almost the past 80 years. With rising tensions regarding these weapons of mass destruction, the time has come for more conclusive resolution. All of us have seen the power that nuclear weapons possess. With this resolution, we thoroughly disarm, discourage, and prevent future conflicts and thus possible worldwide devastation. Delegates, agreeing to this resolution will greatly benefit not only individual nations, but the world as a whole. Clause 1 and Clause through 3 asks all nations to have facilities abide by internationally and scientifically agreed on standards to reduce hazards and possible casualties. Clause 4 calls for complete transparency from all member states regarding all nuclear-related actions, greatly reducing tensions and leading to a more open forum for disarmament. Delegates, this resolution has the potential to better shape the future of worldwide communication regarding nuclear arms. The delegate of Germany is in full support of the delegate of New Zealand's resolution and strongly urges all member nations to be in favor of this resolution. The delegate now yields the floor back to the chair. So this main sponsor speech here is quite perfect, right? It talks about the context. The world is on brink of destruction by nuclear weapons. It talks about the evidence, the actual clauses within the resolution. They talk about clause 3, 1, and 4, and why they work. And lastly, they end with a conclusion calling for an action. Vote or not vote depends on the speech. What I would say is that the evidence they provide here is good, but there's not a lot of analysis. So maybe say exactly what you want to do according to the clauses, like actually quote them out. That might actually be a bit better. Right, so amendments. So after you've gone through the alternate pattern of for and against speeches, you will eventually arrive at amendments, which are basically proposed changes to a resolution, right? Like I said before, there's friendly and unfriendly amendments. Amendments that are friendly are basically just accepted by the main submitter, but unfriendly amendments have to be debated by the committee. So then we will go into a mini debate of alternate for and against speeches, and then you will vote on the amendments first. Then you will vote on the larger resolution. So let's read out a friendly and then unfriendly amendment. So a friendly amendment is modify clause 3, suggesting all countries to develop the public image, stature, and awareness of their culture in order to prevent the degradation of culture and help strengthen citizens' relations and love for the country by means such as but not limited to blah 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 blah. Then amendment type unfriendly, this is not accepted, this will go into debate, is strike through subclause establishing a UN institution to garner funding to create museums that display the culture of every country and that every country in that country. That's crazy. But since this is striked as an unfriendly amendment, we will now go into a debate session where the submitter of the amendment will come up and provide a for speech, and then other people will provide an against speech, and then if there's time, there's additional for and against speeches. Voting. At the end of the debate, chairs will ask all delegates to vote for the resolution. Remember, present and voting is important here. So there are 3 different things you can say. All in favor of this resolution, and then you raise your placard if you're in favor. All against this resolution, raise your placard. Or all abstaining, please raise your placards. So there's 2 ways you can get a majority. A simple majority is basically 51% of all present delegates must say yes, and a supermajority where 2/3 plus 1 of all present delegates must agree to the resolution. So you use simple majority in more procedural voting, while in substantive voting, such as on resolutions or amendments, you're more likely to use supermajorities. So now we have roll call voting, right? A motion for a roll call vote may be made by any delegate or when the chair thinks placard voting is unreliable. So like if you can't count that much, or if there's a lot of delegates or it's unreliable in some way, then we will use roll call voting. So we will call up each delegate and you will say yes, no, yes with rights, which is basically a substantive vote in the affirmative that allows delegates to explain their vote. So if you say yes or no with rights, you can explain why you actually don't agree with a resolution or agree with a resolution. And no with rights, same thing. You might abstain if you say present, or pass, where if you use a pass, you abandon your right to abstain and must use a yes or no. So that's a bit complicated there. Here are some pictures from MUN, right? I've gone a lot into like the nitty gritty of MUN. Basically, you've been very boring for like 44 minutes exactly, right? Or something like that, depending on how how many sniffles I've taken and how many I had to edit it out. But remember, MUN is actually about community. It's about fun, right? There is a lot of socializing and a lot of friends to be made in MUN. It's not only about debating. It's also about your friends, about your community. And once you go to a lot, you'll know a lot of them. All right, we're gonna go briefly into making and improvising speeches, okay? So a reminder in language, as I said before, I, you, we, they is not allowed, only the delegate of the country or the delegates of blah, 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 blah. So opening speeches, we've gone through a lot, but it's basically to introduce your stance again, right? Introducing the solutions you want to implement, finding the possible allies in countries with similar stances by showing them what you actually believe officially, and it's your first chance to show off to the delegates and chairs. So if you have a good opening speech, the rest of the conference will be easy for you because the chairs are like, whoa, that was a really good speech, and the delegates will be like, whoa, that's a really, really strong speaker, okay? So there are parts of an opening speech. In here it's a statement, but it's a speech. Okay? So there's the initial address, hook, topic introduction, stance, evidence, then proposed solutions, and then yielding. Since you have 1 minute, these might just be one sentence. Okay? So the initial address is honorable chairs and fellow delegates, or honorable chairs, esteemed delegates, and distinguished guests, blah, 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 just to address them, basically, right? Then you have the hook. What is going to make people listen to your speech, right? It's an optional quote, statistic, or rhetorical question to make people interested in the speech. So, for example, the delegate of Niger is afraid for the people of Niger, afraid for the future of the Sahel, and afraid for how far international diplomacy has followed. Something that's really interesting, that grabs their attention by the throat, bring them and reel them in to talk about what you truly believe in character. Right? This is something that's really powerful. It is often the most important sentence in an opening speech. Then you have your stance and evidence, the actual substantive part, right? So a description of your country's stance as a whole on the topic. So Niger values regional solutions to alleviating national tensions, or you can say you back this up with a 1 to 2 past actions that your country has taken regarding the topic. For example, the alliance of the Sahel states has set the precedent for collaborative security against external aggression, for example. There's also proposed solutions, a solution that your country wants to implement to address the committee topic, right? So the most common solutions in MUN include creating a new committee, a new council, a new agency to handle these different things and their functions, or you have awareness programs or international cooperation, right? An example would be the delegate welcomes collaboration with other African nations in peacekeeping and diplomatic efforts. Way to do it. So the delegate of blah, 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 blah would like to yield the floor back to the chair. Here it is an example of an opening statement. We've read this before, so I'm not going to touch on much, but as you can see the address, context, evidence, and then summary implemented within this speech. Same with here, we've also covered this, so no need. This is actually an outline, so you can screenshot this if you like, but you don't really need to if you don't want to. For and against speeches, like I said before, they are basically to persuade people to shift their stances in a certain way. So parts of a for and against speech include an initial address, a stance, a clause or position of the resolution, an explanation, a conclusion, and then you yield the floor back to the chair. So here is a very, very detailed example. I'm not going to read all of this out, but as you can see, the initial address, the stance, the clause or position of the resolution, an explanation, and then the conclusion, and then yielding. Amendment speeches. So this is quite the same as a for and against speech, but it's more specific, right? So you present your stance and why, and then you encourage the delegates to vote on the same stance. If you submitted the amendment, present the amendment. Why was it made exactly, so that they know you're not just playing games, and why it is important to implement it into the resolution. So apply this directly into the resolution. Don't just use the resolution as the evidence. Use the resolution and then link it to the amendment. Why would the amendment actually make the resolution better? So if you're for the amendment, address how why the amendment adds to the resolution, and then against, address how or why it is not necessary for the resolution to include the amendment. And lastly, you persuade the delegates of why the amendment strengthens and then weakens the resolution. So parts of an amendment speech parts of an amendment speech have initial address, stance, clause, or position of the resolution, then an explanation, and then a conclusion, and then you yield the floor back to the chair. Here is a for and against speech. Initial address, stance, what do you believe in? Clause, basically the evidence you want to strike. Then you have the reasoning, the explanation of why it is important, and then the conclusion, what you want the delegates to get out of this speech, and then you yield the floor back to the chair. So there comes a time when, if you're advanced enough, you're going to be able to, like this, improvise speeches out of thin air, sometimes without even the need to make up facts or statistics. You actually just know the information itself, right? So when improvising a speech, annotate a lot. What parts of the resolution do you want to address, and give some examples of why it is strong or weak, either in your brain or on a piece of paper on your computer, right? Address the issues raised in debate with newly added information or ideas to show that you are engaged, that you are attentive within the debate. Then do not forget to maintain a structure. Just because you're improvising a speech does not mean that you're not getting graded on the same basis. You are, right? You just forgot to write a speech, or there's no time. It doesn't matter. You still have to have a hook, introduction, main ideas, conclusion, etc. What I really experienced so far is that it's actually easier to have the substantive part than the hook. So you should spend a lot of time coming up with the hook so that people listen to you, and then you can kind of speak freely on the new point, okay? So here are a few helpful sentence stems. The delegate of blah 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 would like to draw the committee's attention to clause number dash and then you elaborate the significance of what it shows, why it makes the resolution strong or weak, right? There's also the purpose. The purpose of this is basically to point out a specific example to support your stance or point, useful for pointing out a significantly strong or weak clause, so attacking, right? Therefore, due to its blah 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 and dot, e.g. the inability to realistically address the issue of whatever you're talking about, this delegate strongly encourages the House to vote for or against this resolution, amendment, or clause. This is basically to summarize the point that you are making in your speech and to connect it to your position, right? And lastly, several delegates have expressed concern over the issue of for example, the aspect of topics like a lack of adequate sanitation in a refugee camp, for example. This delegate believes that clause underscore tackles this point adequately because, or rather than dash, as clause dash suggests, this delegate instead encourages dash. To propose, basically, this is to propose a solution or point out a lack of substance in a resolution specifically to address an important cause, repercussion, or an issue, right? So in summary, you most of the time have 60 seconds to speak maximum. It may vary due to chair's discretion or depending on the conference or motion that you have. Use appropriate language, please, and have good organization. You need to be relevant, concise, straightforward, and easy to understand. But this does not mean that you cannot be sophisticated. You can use relatively advanced words, you can use relatively advanced ideas, just present it in a way that's very easy and very simple to understand to the delegates and to the chair as well, right? An example would be the delegate of your country believes that the resolution or amendment provides a beneficial idea to this topic at hand and may let us reach a strong conclusion in this issue. Or it might be an example against the delegate of blah 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 believes that resolution or amendment provides a detrimental idea to this topic at hand and may let us reach disastrous consequences that could ruin this issue for many countries. I would class disastrous and detrimental as a pretty hard word, especially for high school students. At least like the first half, right? So using these words, you can use them, but be careful with how you present them. Maybe connect them to ideas that have the same meaning so that delegates are not confused, because there are people who don't know what these words are. So in summary, give an example that proves the delegate's point and explain why. right? This is optional, but very, very recommended. It gives you more points, more favorability with the chair, right? An example would be blah 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 helps us solve this part of the topic in an efficient and successful manner that this delegate believes all countries can follow effectively, because then you provide your reasoning. Or a specific section would cause a negative result, and this delegate is disgusted that this idea has even been presented as a solution, right? You discuss counter arguments and other claims presented by other delegates earlier and explain why they are wrong, because you are right. And then you reiterate and then emphasize the points and encourage delegates to vote for or against something, right? So an example would be, overall, this is an effective resolution/amendment, and this delegate strongly urges the House to vote for it. Example against would be, overall, this is a weak resolution amendment, and this delegate blah 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 blah. All right. We're just going to go through the MUN committees as well. I know you've been with us for a very long time now. It's probably an hour now, but here we go. So the structure of the United Nations in real life, there are 6 principal organs. There is the GA, UNGA, General Assembly, Security Council, Economic and Social Council, International Court of Justice, Trusteeship Council, and the UN Secretariat. Within these organs, there are smaller committees that are often used in MUN. Here are some. So we need to distinguish them first. So there's a general and a special committee. A general committee is a simulation of an existing UN committee where every delegate represents a country. The agenda is a real topic at the present, not a historical or fantastical event. Special committees are a committee where delegates do not represent a country, or it is a committee that is non-UN related, historical or fictional in setting. It may have different ROPs as well. You might have to fight a war or fight in a fantasy world. Let's see what they are. So in general assemblies, you have the UNGA, General Discussion, UNSC, ECOSOC, UN Women, WHO, UNEP, DISEC, SPECPOL, UNHRC, UNOSA, ILO, IMF, and UNESCO. So let's go through each one. Starting with UNSC. This is the hardest this is definitely the hardest general committee that you can find. Why? There's functions like veto, all that stuff. I'm not going to go over them in this session, but it's a relatively hard committee because it's almost exclusively about war, death, or destruction, right? So it might not be your cup of tea, which I need. ECOSOC is about economics, society, and environment. So if you're a lot about social problems, racism, economic disparity, wage cuts, all these things, go to ECOSOC. It's quite an easy committee. UN Women is exclusively about women's rights. Actually, my MUN dream is to chair a UN Women's Committee because, as you know, I am a guy. So that would be a very, very interesting experience. It probably won't happen because, you know, I am a guy. But let's see how this goes. I will tell you if I do get a UN Women position later on. WHO is exclusively about healthcare. Vaccination comes up a lot, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic. There's also about accessibility to healthcare, how hospitals operate, blah, 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 right? There's also UNEP, which is exclusively about the environment. DISEC, which is about destroying armaments, probably a lot about nuclear weapons. It's probably the second hardest committee. Third hardest committee would be SPECPOL. So it's about UN peacekeeping, decolonization, politics overall, right? UNHRC is about human rights. So it's a lot about dictatorships, it's about refugees, all those different fun things to talk about. UNOSA is about outer space. So, for example, ownership of the moon, ownership of space, mining rights, asteroid collisions, etc. Right? ILO is about labor rights. This doesn't come up a lot, but ILO is just about like unions and all that stuff. The IMF is about the economy, how we can support struggling economies, and UNESCO is about science and culture, like the preservation of different sites that are historically important to different places. The UNGA is the main organ of the UN. It has 193 members, one of every member state, basically, and each member of the UNGA can send up to 5 delegates who collectively have 1 vote. Let's go into the special committees really quick before time runs out on the camcorder. So, features of a special committee includes it does not follow the traditional ROP, or it has a structure that's different within the MUN circuit, right? So here are some special committees: Press Corps, ICJ, HSC, HCC, HSOC, USCC, UKPC, FIFA, IOC, and Fantasy Councils. Press corporations basically report on things that are happening in the conference, and they can post it on Instagram and such. I don't really like it, but some people like it because you walk a lot, you talk a lot, and then you can make memes if you want. ICJ is basically the International Court of Justice. It typically has 4 advocates, 8 people, and then it has judges that are different from chairs, right? So chairs facilitate, judges ask the question and actually deliberate on the motion. HSC is basically UNSC, but it's responding to a historical event. HEC and SOC, oh, this is so fun. Basically, you can fight a war. There is a crisis situation, for example, the Russian Civil War, that you must fight. You must defeat the enemy. So there's a lot of rolling. There's a special mechanism in place to make sure that they can decide which unit wins engagement and which unit does not win engagement. UKPC and UCC is basically just emulating the UK government or the US Congress Committee, and they typically talk about things that the US or the UK is related to. FIFA is about FIFA. It's about football and who wins awards, such and such and such. IOC is International Olympic Committee. These are sports committees. They don't have that much depth into them, but it's a very interesting way to discuss new topics that you may find relevant. Right? There's also fantasy councils, or a legislative body where you're basically doing a fictional piece of media, right? So it might not be. It would probably be about Lord of the Rings or Pirates of the Caribbean and stuff like that. Fantasy councils are just MUN committees that simulate a legislative body in a fictional piece of media. And fantasy councils are not very popular within the Thai MUN circuit, but have been attempted successfully in multiple online MUNs. Alright, that is it for the session. Thank you guys. See you later.